Tanzanian President John Magufuli has issued a statement raising concerns about misinformation that leads to citizens panicking. The Tanzanian government has already issued a warning that government will begin a crackdown on those peddling fake news. We're now crossing live to Tanzania to our correspondent Isaac Lukando. A very good afternoon to you, Isaac. Firstly, let's start with the latest. Can you just give us a brief rundown of the latest stats?
Good afternoon to you. The latest is that the number of confirmed cases in Tanzania, COVID-19 cases in Tanzania, has risen from the initial 6 to now 12. This was just announced about half an hour ago by the president of Tanzania. This was his second address today. The initial address was made in church to congregants there and to the nation at large, where he spoke about what he termed as fear-mongering on social media, but only to later on give an address where he now confirmed these new cases of the coronavirus in the country, which now brings the number to 12.
Now, Isaac, the issue of misinformation during this time is not only a challenge to Tanzania, but to the world at large here in South Africa. It is somewhat a criminal offence to be spreading fake news. How is Tanzania handling the issue of misinformation regarding COVID-19?
So far it has just been statements being issued. You heard the health minister talking about it, asking citizens to only spread what the health ministry has issued in terms of correct information, in terms of the number of people that have been affected by the coronavirus, so that the Ministry of Health is the sole entity that can issue correct information on the COVID-19 virus. But also generally there have just been statements being given, but so far no legal action has been taken against those spreading what would be termed as false information. But yesterday we had the Prime Minister of the country come out and ask the regulatory authority, the Communications Regulatory Authority, to take legal action against those who peddle fake news, because they deem it to have reached a point where it might affect the country's fight against the coronavirus.
Speaking of the country's fight, after reporting those cases, of course, you have confirmed to us that it has now changed from 6 to 12 as of the last half hour or so. Are we likely to see Dar es Salaam tightening some of the measures with regards to quarantine times, some areas being cordoned off, and somewhat lockdowns that we're seeing through the other parts in African countries?
What we do know is that there are some measures that have been ramped up, but maybe not to the extreme. The president in his address talked about the formation of a special committee. There was a committee in the beginning, but now this one will now be headed by the Prime Minister and the Health Minister, along with other selected members who will focus efforts on trying to curb the spread of the disease. But also they talked about isolation times for foreign visitors. They did not refuse entry. They have not yet refused entry to foreign visitors, but they do say that if you are coming from a country that has been affected by the coronavirus, then you'll have to self-isolate for 14 days upon entry into the country, and that will be at your own cost.
All right. Well,
they've also talked about ramping up the country's laboratories, security organs along borders, and a statement has also been issued to the effect that public officials will not be allowed to travel outside the country, especially to countries that have been greatly affected by the coronavirus.
You've mentioned more or less some of the travel restrictions and, of course, the travel measures for tourists coming in and out. This has a serious impact on tourism. We see that globally. Just the 2 days or so, UK had their last night out, as they called it, before a total clampdown. We've also seen reports coming in from the UAE that all public spaces as well as beach have now been officially closed. How has Tanzania been affected, in particular in this time, and pertaining to Zanzibar, which seems to be one of the huge holiday hotspots for many tourists making their way to Tanzania?
Well, as far as Zanzibar is concerned, the government there on the semi-autonomous island are not taking any chances. They have all but shut down all the 487 hotels there. The last group of tourists, about 500 or so Russian tourists, were to exit the island, and they would shut down all hotels on the island as part of measures to curb the spread of the coronavirus. In terms of effects, Zanzibar is perhaps going to feel economic effects the most because it is heavily dependent on tourism. About 80% of its foreign revenue comes from tourism, and therefore a lot of families will be affected by the shutdown of all these hotels.
Thank you very much for giving us an update this afternoon. In Tanzania, our correspondent Isaac Lukando just taking us through some of the measures being put in place with regards to misinformation being spread in Tanzania, also confirming now that the COVID-19 cases in Tanzania have risen from 6 to 12.